In the beginning, before history was charted, the Giant Kings manifested from the stars and the darkness of the void. They came to be in an ancient land, yet artifacts of races even before them remained. They would go on to form the first known shape of the Exiled Lands. In time, the Giant Kings established their empire across the Exiled Lands with their capital at what is now known as the Unnamed City. They built great infrastructure, towering walls and enormous aqueducts, dams and bridges, and plenty more to exercise their will on the soil. Their empire was ruled by a triumvirate: the religious leader, the priest king, the keeper of knowledge, the archivist, and the warmaker, charged with defense of the realm when necessary. In time, the Giant Kings found the volcano in the north, and within a den of serpent men, some of whom had travelled from the prehistoric Isle of Siptar with the shining trapezohedron. The Giant Kings and the Serpent Men became allies over their joint worship of Set, the Old Serpent. The Serpent Men gave the Giant Kings the Staff of the Triumvirate to guide them, though the staff secretly led them astray, as the Serpent Men believed the Giant Kings had stolen their Serpent Ring of Set. Many years later, at the end of the Thurian Age, the cataclysm struck the lands of Lemuria. Led by their witch queen, the people fled their sinking isles and sailed westward. Though initially captured and enslaved by the Kari, some would find freedom and sail west again into the unending ocean. The Lemurians would eventually come across a swampy coast, where great mountains rose in the distance and towering structures of ancient design dominated the land. They came into contact with the Giant Kings and fell in worship, seeing them as gods. Together, both sides worked to forge the bracelets, allowing communication between the races. The bracelets served as a symbol of their harmony, and the Giant Kings allowed the Lemurians to live by the ocean in the east, where the latter built their city of Zelha. Both civilizations occupied the Exiled Lands and lived in relative peace for a considerable period. Due to their rapid population growth, the Lemurians sought fresh land in the north, beyond the empire of the Giant Kings, to found a new city. They discovered the volcano, and within, the Serpent Men of Volusia, an ancient enemy of humanity that the great Cull of Atlantis had sought to exterminate. The Lemurians demanded permission from the Giant Kings to slay the final remnants of the evil serpents, but the kings refused, and war was declared. The Giant Kings took the initial advantage, revealing a hidden death weave within the bracelets both races had forged. This sorcery activated the Cursed Wall, causing anyone bearing the bracelet to meet instant death if they tried to cross the Green Barrier. Indeed, the Lemurians were now trapped within the Exiled Lands. At some point after the Lemurian arrival, but before the end of the war, sorcery in the north caused the disjunction, turning the once rocky peaks into a frozen wasteland. The timeline on this is really unclear, but it definitely happened between those two markers. The war took many lives on both sides. The Lemurians lost their outpost of Zulan beside the volcano, but through the bonds of love would find a new ally in Tyros the Deathbringer, son of the Priest King and commander of the Silent Legion, part of the Giant King's armies. The newly allied forces betrayed and slew the Archivist at the Circle of Swords, and then unleashed a devastating weapon at the Battle of the Shattered Springs, annihilating the armies of the Giant Kings. The kings fled south, and the Priest King, under influence of the Staff of the Triumvirate, convinced the Warmaker to unleash the Heart of the Sands, a sandstorm elemental to scourge Zelha and eliminate the Lemurians. The Priest King left before it was deployed, throwing the Staff of the Triumvirate into the sewers of the Unnamed City and travelling north to fight his son, Tyros. The Priest King would fall to Tyros' hands at the Mounds of the Dead, cursing him with eternal life in his dying breath. In his immortality, Tyros would become the Kinscourge. Unleashed by the Warmaker, the sandstorm hurtled towards Zelha. At the last moment, a Lemurian priest named Petruso stepped into the storm and bound the incoming sand to his flesh. This locked the sand elemental into a temporal loop, doomed to repeat its path over and over again, unable to finish its task. Not only would this curse Petruso with eternal life, the sandstorm would also erode the once temperate hills into jagged rocks and folds of sand, dooming the remaining Giant Kings to a slow, withering defeat. In the wake of the war, the Lemurians sought to wipe out the last vestiges of the Giant Kings. At some point, though it is unclear when, the Kari fled a slave revolt in their empire. Some appear to have stayed on the Thurian continent and founded Stygia, however others arrived on the Exiled Lands, potentially helping the Lemurians with their effort to be rid of the Giant Kings. The Kari attempted to build a new empire in the western desert, but the ground shifted in another cataclysm, dooming their budding civilization to a cavern later known as the Wine Cellar, where a demon ensured their death. The Lemurians would eventually, as many others do, move and evolve. Those that stayed in Zelhar appear to have found consort with beasts and became beasts themselves. Others bred with outsiders and blended into other races. In the modern day, only a mere handful of true Lemurians can be found in the Exiled Lands, and their race at large falls into the annals of history. Sometime in the modern Hyborian Age, Thoth Amon, a sorcerer from Stygia, would come across the Exiled Lands on his journeys. He found the Warmaker, the final living Giant King, in the remains of the unnamed city. Discussing the history of the Empire with the Warmaker, Thoth would become aware of the Serpent Ring of Set and would steal it from the ruins. With this great artifact of power, Thoth Amon would come to shape the modern Exiled Lands. With his new artifact, Thoth Amon solidified his place in the Black Ring of Stygia, a collection of powerful sorcerers. Thoth used the Serpent Ring and knowledge of creating the slave bracelets to sway King Ctesiphon of Stygia, offering the Exiled Lands as a prison to which the king could send his opponents without fear of repercussions. Thoth would later come to offer these services to rulers across the world without knowledge that other rulers were taking advantage. Thoth would also begin to employ mercenaries to besiege the prisoners, steal the relics they dug up, and bring them back to Thoth Amon. Another man, Mech opposed his rise in the Black Ring. Thoth Amon used his influence to have Mech sent away to the Exiled Lands, where he remains to this very day. Eventually, the player character, the Exile, is sent to the Exiled Lands. Doomed to death in the desert, he is cut down from the cross by Conan the Barbarian, who had arrived some time earlier. The Exile goes on to seek survival and escape the Exiled Lands. He would come to be instrumental in the events of the world. Strange pillars of corruption erupt in the Exiled Lands, and sometime later, a mysterious sorcerer named Kurak arrives with his cult in tow, introducing sorcery once thought impossible due to the magic of the bracelets. Mech, still trapped within the Curse Wall, becomes intrigued and finds Kurak is following the lead of a Dark Master who appears to be Nyarlathotep. Mech sends the Exile into Kurak's lair to slay him, and the Exile does just that. With Kurak's head and a captured princess, Mech plots to bring down the Curse Wall and destroy Thoth Amon's grand prison. However, just before he can spill the royal blood of the princess and complete the ritual, Conan the Barbarian arrives, having heard the screams from the spire. He cuts through Mech's camp and decapitates the sorcerer before retreating with the princess back to Sepameru. Mech would continue to live on as a head in a basket, willed on by his sorcerous power, his Khitan mercenaries searching for a new body. A while later, King Ctesiphon of Stygia rallies the armies. With the coffers needing coin and having heard of the many great riches within the Exiled Lands, the Stygian army is sent to march on the sands and claim gold for the Stygian Empire. The army arrives, routing Thoth Amon's mercenaries and claiming the Exiled Lands as their own. They lay siege to the exiles, stealing generations of wealth from within their walls, slaying their kin and burning their settlements to the ground. Constructing the grand castle of Al Moriah on the cusp of the savannah, the Stygians continued to savage the land for a time, until the many tribes and warriors gathered together, finding alliance to lay siege in return to the Stygian castle. The Stygian commander, Bakht Nimlot, is slain in the treasure room, and the exiles reclaim their gold. In the wake of the siege, as exiles celebrated their recovered riches, one exile saw a newly uncovered passage below the ruined castle. Descending into the cave, he found primordial paintings and a gore-ridden altar. With but a touch of his blood-stained hand, the altar awoke, rousing the great Jebel Sag from his slumber. The Lord of Beasts sees the destruction wrought and invokes the great sacred hunt, where all flesh is for feasting and beast and man will fight for supremacy. The exile joins the sacred hunt after a chance encounter with a loping were-hyena in the night. He slays Jebel-Sag's champions, and entering a pocket of the Midnight Grove he slays Gura the Hunter, the corrupted Grand Champion of Jebel-Sag's sacred hunt. Crowned as the new champion of the Beast Lord, Jebel-Sag's thirst for blood is satiated, for now. In the wake of the sacred hunt, the Exiled Lands grows quiet again. After war, the exiles rebuild grand settlements. They rouse thralls and friends to come together and survive the dire sands. At some point in the future, the exile may find freedom through the Keystone, but the history of the Exiled Lands will still be written. Undoubtedly, in the future, the quiet of the sands will break once more, be it by man or by gods. And there we have it, the full history of the Exiled Lands. The timeline is generally a bit rough to work out between the ages, and information is vague on some pieces, but nonetheless it's an interesting tale of events, especially seeing as areas like the Circle of Swords existed far before the Giant Kings, who themselves seem to have existed before documented history. Mysteries like that only raise more questions, but that's a topic for another day. Thank you for watching, and of course a massive thanks to our wonderful, esteemed coffee cultists for continuing to support the channel over on Patreon. If you want to support the channel yourself, check out the Patreon through the link in the description, or join here as a member on YouTube by clicking join just below this video. Take care, and I'll see you soon.